The Shard, London, midnight. Sarah Mitchell, nurse by day and cleaner by night, finds her 8-year-old son Oliver in CEO William Harrington's office. The boy is touching the 100,000-pound chess set, ivory pieces that belong to Churchill. Before Sarah can drag him away in terror, Oliver moves the Black Knight to F6. The billionaire, who hadn't cried since his daughter's funeral 2 years ago, collapses in devastating sobs. That move, Sophie's Gambit, was the secret he shared only with his daughter, who died of leukemia. No one in the world knew it. How could the son of a cleaner know? The answer will shatter everything science believes about life and death. The Shard pierced London's night sky like a blade of glass and steel. 72 floors of economic power, where during the day the fates of corporations and nations were decided. But at midnight, it became the silent kingdom of Sarah Mitchell and her cleaning trolley. Sarah was 35 years old, but looked 45, marked by double shifts that began at 6 in the morning at St. Thomas's Hospital and ended at 2 in the night in the offices of Harrington Industries. Every night she brought Oliver with her. 8 years of intelligence hidden behind clothes from Brick Lane Market, because paying a babysitter would have wiped out the extra income needed to survive. The boy had learned to be invisible. He slept on the break room sofa from the 10th to the 40th floor, while his mother polished desks that cost more than their flat. He had learned to touch nothing, leave no trace, exist like an educated ghost in that world of luxury that didn't belong to him. William Harrington ruled his empire from the 70th floor, an executive suite of 800 square meters where every object was a work of art and every decision was worth millions. At 52, he had conquered everything money could buy and lost the only thing it couldn't, his daughter Sophie, dead 2 years earlier after 3 years battling leukemia. Since then, the office had become a mausoleum to her memory. Discreet but omnipresent photographs, the Steinway piano she played still covered, and above all the chess set in the corner, untouched since they'd played their last game 3 days before she died. That November night, with London wrapped in fog, fate moved its pieces. Harrington had stayed in the office late, as always, since home meant only emptiness. Sarah cleaned methodically, unaware that her son had woken, and wandered the corridors, drawn by something he couldn't define. The boy found himself before the main office door, the one his mother had told him never to cross. But it was ajar, and an invisible force seemed to call him. He entered with the caution of a wild animal, eyes widening at the opulence, paintings he'd seen in school books, Persian rugs that seemed too beautiful to walk on, and in the corner, illuminated by moonlight, the chess set. Oliver had never seen real chess pieces. He knew the game from old library books, had played mentally when he couldn't sleep, but these pieces were different. They seemed alive, charged with history, and his hands moved before his mind could stop them. He touched the Black Knight, feeling the ivory smoothed by centuries under his fingers. A voice in his head, sweet and clear as he'd never heard before, whispered the coordinates. Knight to F6. The move flowed through him as if he'd made it 1,000 times. Sarah entered the office at that precise moment, blood freezing as she saw her son profaning the Holy of Holies of London's most powerful man. But before she could scream, move, breathe, the main door opened, and William Harrington entered. The man saw the scene, the poor child, the terrified cleaner, the Black Knight on F6, and his world shattered. His legs gave way. Tears exploded like a breaking dam. Sobs he hadn't allowed even at Sophie's funeral. Sophie's Gambit, the secret opening he'd invented with his daughter when she was 6, modified and perfected over 4 years of games, never written down, never shared, dead with her. Yet here it was, executed by a child who shouldn't even know how the pieces moved. Sarah tried to drag Oliver away, stammering apologies fragmented by panic, promising they would disappear, that she wouldn't sue for illegal dismissal. that she would do anything. But Harrington raised a trembling hand, eyes fixed on the boy with an intensity that bordered on madness or salvation. The question came out broken, almost incomprehensible through tears he couldn't stop. How did he know that move? And Oliver's answer, spoken with the naturalness of someone discussing the weather, changed 3 lives forever. The blonde girl in his dreams had taught him, the one called Sophie, who said her daddy was too sad. The silence that followed lasted an eternity, compressed into seconds. Harrington looked at the boy as one looks at a miracle or hallucination, unable to distinguish between the two. Sarah held Oliver as if she could protect him from the madness she felt gathering in the room. And Oliver, with the calm of one who doesn't understand the gravity of the moment, asked if he could finish the game because Sophie said it was important. 3 in the morning found them still in the office. Harrington had called Professor Davidson, a world-renowned neurologist who had treated Sophie, dragging him from bed with the authority of someone who could buy anyone's time. Sarah sat rigid on the leather sofa, Oliver in her protective arms, while the doctor performed test after test with portable instruments that seemed from a science fiction film. The electroencephalogram showed patterns Davidson had never seen in 40 years of practice. Not epilepsy, not schizophrenia, not any known pathology. Oliver's brain showed anomalous activity in the temporal lobe, waves that seemed to respond to stimuli that didn't exist in the room. Harrington had spread everything on the table. Photos of Sophie at every age, videos of their chess games, notebooks where he'd transcribed every conversation in her last months. He showed everything to Oliver with the desperation of someone seeking confirmation of the impossible, and each time the boy recognized, remembered, new things he shouldn't know. Sophie's birthday, the name of her favorite teddy, a bear called Aristotle that no photo showed, the song they sang together, an old Yorkshire lullaby that Harrington's grandmother sang and that existed in no recording, detail upon detail, building a truth impossible to accept and impossible to deny. Sarah listened to her son's account with growing terror. Oliver spoke of dreams he'd had for 2 years, since he was 6. A blonde girl who appeared at night, first silent and sad, then increasingly lively and talkative. She taught him complicated games, told him about her father who worked in a very tall tower, and cried when he thought no one was watching. At first, Sarah had dismissed it all as childhood fantasy, Oliver's way of processing the absence of the father he'd never known. Lonely children invent imaginary friends. It was normal, said all the pedagogy books she read at the library. But now, faced with the evidence, terror mixed with something deeper. Harrington asked a question that changed the night's direction. He asked Sarah where she was on July 3rd, 2 years ago, at exactly 3:47 p.m. Sarah didn't remember, but Harrington did. It was the exact time of Sophie's death, certified by the doctors at Great Ormond Street. With trembling hands, Harrington turned on the computer and began digging through hospital databases, using access that money and power guaranteed him. Sarah suddenly remembered. That day she was in hospital for a routine check. Oliver had had a high fever, and they'd admitted him as a precaution. Pediatric ward, St. Thomas's Hospital. The medical files confirmed everything. Oliver had been admitted to room 304, General Pediatrics. Sophie was in 308, Pediatric Oncology, at Great Ormond Street, but St. Thomas's and Great Ormond Street shared electronic systems, and, through a technical glitch that day, their monitoring systems had briefly cross-connected. 4 rooms and a world of social difference separated them. Yet they had been electronically linked at the exact moment Sophie breathed her last, and Oliver had a febrile seizure that made him delirious for hours. Professor Davidson, who until that moment had maintained professional skepticism, paled reading the reports. He spoke of controversial studies on quantum consciousness, the theoretical possibility that in moments of extreme neurological vulnerability, 2 minds could create a bridge. Documented but never proven cases of twins sharing pain at a distance, mothers knowing when their children were in danger miles away. But this was different. This was a living child who seemed to contain the memories of a dead girl. Two strangers linked only by the coincidence of being connected through a computer glitch at the most vulnerable moment of their existence. Oliver interrupted the adult speculation with childhood's devastating simplicity. He said Sophie wasn't inside him, didn't possess him. They were friends, like when two phones accidentally connect to the same frequency. She showed him things, taught him, but he remained Oliver. And he added, with that voice that seemed to contain echoes of another person, that Sophie wanted her father to stop blaming himself for her death. Harrington collapsed again, pain and hope colliding in an emotional short circuit. 2 years of guilt for not finding the right cure.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
For not trying that last experimental treatment, for being on a video conference with Tokyo instead of at her bedside when she died. Sarah watched everything with a divided mind. The mother in her screamed that she should protect Oliver from this madness, take him away, pretend nothing had happened. But the part of her that had seen too much suffering in hospital, that had held the hands of dying children whose parents couldn't afford to miss work, recognized something true in this impossible moment. The night slipped toward dawn while Oliver, with infinite patience, moved pieces on the chessboard showing games Sophie and Harrington had played. Not just the moves, but the comments, the laughter, the moments when Sophie cheated because her father let her win. Every detail was a stab of impossible truth. The following weeks transformed the impossible into routine. Harrington had arranged for Sarah to bring Oliver to his office every evening after her hospital work, paying her as a consultant rather than a cleaner. The official pretext was that Oliver was a chess prodigy Harrington was sponsoring, a story the media accepted enthusiastically. The reality was more complex. Every evening from 6 to 8, Oliver and Harrington played chess while Sarah watched from the corner armchair, torn between wonder and terror. During those games, Oliver changed. Not physically, but in the way he moved, tilted his head, laughed. He became a bridge between two worlds. Professor Davidson had set up an improvised laboratory in the adjacent office, monitoring every session with increasingly sophisticated instruments. The data he collected defied all scientific understanding. During the games, Oliver's brain showed activity in normally dormant areas, patterns that seemed to respond to invisible stimuli. One afternoon, while they played, Oliver stopped mid-move and looked at Harrington with an urgency that wasn't his. He said he needed to check his pancreas immediately, without waiting. Harrington paled. His father had died of pancreatic cancer. His grandfather, too. The genetic curse hanging over the family like a sword. Tests revealed a 2-millimeter tumor, so small no routine screening would have found it for years. Operable, curable, if caught in time. 6 months later, it would have been a death sentence. Sophie, through Oliver, had saved her father. But the price of this miracle was beginning to show. Oliver increasingly had headaches after sessions. He confused his memories with Sophie's, spoke of places never visited, used words too complex for his age. Sarah found him sometimes staring into space, as if listening to a conversation only he could hear. One night she found him crying in bed, shaking with fever that wasn't physical but emotional. He confessed that sometimes he didn't know who he was anymore, whether he was Oliver or just a telephone through which Sophie spoke. The fear of losing himself terrified him, but he didn't want to disappoint Mr. Harrington, who was so sad. Sarah made a decision that night. She confronted Harrington the next day while Oliver was at school. She told him they were destroying her son, that no amount of money was worth Oliver's identity. Harrington listened in silence, then showed her something he'd kept hidden. The document Harrington placed before Sarah was a proposal beyond all imagination. Not just £200,000 a year for 10 years, not just the best education for Oliver, but the creation of a foundation that would revolutionize childhood leukemia treatment in Britain. The Sophie Harrington Hospital would be built with Harrington's private funds, £300 million from his personal wealth. Every sick child would receive free care, families free accommodation, complete psychological support. And Oliver would be its inspiration, the symbol that hope could come from even the poorest neighborhoods. Sarah looked at the plans, the renderings, the contracts already prepared with construction companies. It wasn't a dream or vague promise. Harrington had already bought the land, obtained permits, hired architects. Only Sarah's yes was missing. But there was more. Harrington had researched her, discovered she'd lost her mother to leukemia when she was 12, that she'd become a nurse because of that loss. He knew that every night, when she cleaned those offices, she dreamed of being able to do more for the children she cared for by day, but whom the NHS couldn't always save. The emotional manipulation was obvious, yet Sarah couldn't deny the truth behind it. How many children would that hospital save? How many families like hers, who couldn't afford the best care, would have a chance? The move to the Kensington penthouse was like entering a film. 400 square meters of discreet luxury, views across all London, a room for Oliver that seemed from his wildest dreams. But the real change was school. Westminster School, where Oliver found himself surrounded by children of ambassadors and CEOs. At first it was hard. The rich children sensed he was different, excluded him with childhood's subtle cruelty. But then they saw how he played chess, how he solved maths problems, how he spoke of things even their private tutors didn't know. Within weeks, he became a small legend, the genius boy billionaire Harrington had discovered. Sessions with Harrington continued, but now with more control. Professor Davidson had developed a protocol to protect Oliver's mind, limiting sessions to 1 hour, 3 times a week. During these hours, Sophie spoke through him, but less and less about the past and more about the future. She spoke of the hospital they were building, gave suggestions that proved genius about ward organization, psychological management of young patients. Ideas no 10-year-old could have had, but which consulting oncologists called revolutionary. Oliver's 10th birthday coincided with what would have been Sophie's 12th. Harrington organized a chess tournament in the atrium of the nearly completed Sophie Harrington Hospital, inviting Europe's best young players. The £100,000 prize would go to the foundation. During the final game, with 200 spectators and BBC cameras, the inevitable happened. Mid-game, Oliver stopped playing. He stood, crossed the hall, and embraced Harrington with a tenderness that wasn't his. Through tears streaming down both faces, Oliver spoke in a voice that was completely Sophie's for the last time. "It was time to go," she said. Oliver was growing up, needed to be only himself, and Harrington needed to let her go, transform pain into action instead of obsession. The hospital was the right way to remember her, not through impossible quantum connections, but through saved lives. The moment lasted perhaps 30 seconds, recorded by dozens of cameras that didn't understand what they were filming. Then Oliver returned to himself, smiled, and went back to the chessboard to win the tournament with brilliance that was completely his own. In the following years, Oliver became everything his talent promised. Grandmaster at 15, medical degree at 22, neurosurgeon at 28. At every milestone, Harrington was present, not as substitute father, but as mentor and friend. The Sophie Harrington Hospital saved thousands of children in its first 10 years. Every room had a chessboard. Every child learned Sophie's Gambit as part of therapy. Studies showed that playing chess during chemotherapy improved outcomes by 30%, something Sophie seemed to have known instinctively. Sarah became director of the hospital's family support program, using her experience to help other struggling single parents. She never remarried, but found in helping others a completeness she'd never known. One evening, 20 years after that first night in the Shard, the three dined together in the hospital's panoramic restaurant. Oliver, now chief of neurosurgery, told of saving a 6-year-old girl from a brain tumor deemed inoperable. While operating, he'd felt something. Not a voice, but a presence, suggesting an approach not in the textbooks. Harrington smiled, now 70 but still vigorous. He said Sophie lived in every saved life, every game played, every moment compassion won over despair. It didn't matter if the connection had been real or a beautiful shared hallucination. What mattered was what had grown from it. Sarah raised her glass for a toast. To the girl she'd never met, but who had changed everything. To the son who'd had the courage to be a bridge between worlds. To the man who'd transformed pain into salvation. And to chess, which sometimes is more than a game. It's the secret language love uses to speak across time and space. The final image shows all three in the hospital atrium, before the giant chessboard on the wall with Sophie's Gambit's final position. Below, the plaque thousands of families read every day. For Sophie Harrington, who lives in every kind move. For Oliver Mitchell, who taught us miracles walk among us in modest shoes. For all children, fighting impossible battles with champion's courage. Knight to F6, the move that changed everything. If you've made it this far, it's because you've felt this story speaks of more than impossible coincidences. It speaks of how pain can become medicine, how loss can become gift, how sometimes the universe uses its humblest children to teach the powerful what truly matters. Leave a like if you believe love survives in ways science cannot explain. It's not just a like, it's your way of saying miracles exist, even when dressed as poor children with worn shoes. In the comments, tell me if you've ever felt a presence you couldn't see, but knew was real. A moment when the boundary between possible and impossible thinned. Share this story with someone who's lost someone dear. Remind them that love doesn't die. It transforms in ways we don't always understand, but that always, always save us. Subscribe and ring the bell to remember that sometimes the next move that changes everything comes from the player no one expects. And remember, on life's chessboard, it's not the kings and queens who make the difference, but the pawns with courage to cross the board. Until the next story that will show you that between life and death, there's a thin space where love plays its eternal game.